Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kelly, your host. Thanks so much for being here with us. We got a good Friday for you. Second hour, Dr. Matthew Bunson will be here, and we'll talk about the church in the news. And there is lots of church in the news, and he is a vice president of EWTN, and his area of expertise, of course, is Catholic journalism. So a very fine Catholic journalist here who runs the media show over there, or the journalism side of the media show over at EWTN. Talk about the church in the news. If you've got questions, bring those the second hour. You know what? We just had a big, giant Eucharistic Congress, so let's do a show about the Eucharist. And if you want to do a really good show about the Eucharist or just about anything else, you invite Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers to be your guest. So Deacon Harold, our guest this hour. If you've got questions about the Eucharist, whether you're Catholic or not, you're welcome to call 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. Deacon Harold is the host, of course, of the show that's on a couple hours before this one, Beacon of Truth. Not Deacon of Truth, Beacon of Truth on EWTN Radio. He's written 6 books, and including Building a Civilization of Love, a Catholic Response to Racism, which every Catholic should read. Everybody should read it. He's got this crazy idea that the gospel heals people, and heals whole societies. He's a Benedictine oblate. And just a fantastic speaker. Deacon Harold, thanks for being here with us.
Yes, I thank you so much for having me. It's great to be back on Catholic Answers again.
Yeah.
I love being part of the Catholic Answers family, so thank you so much for having me.
Well, you're very kind to squeeze us in between things, too. It's like you do your own show, and then you've got to talk tonight, and you're like, it's all right, I'll squeeze you in the middle. So thanks for the spirit of service. Very much thanks for that.
Always happy to help out.
All right, so I wanted to ask you, I do want to ask you about the Eucharistic Congress. You spoke there, you were on the main stage and all that, which I don't know how you do that without fainting when there's like 35,000 people there. I'll ask you about all that, but I know you just got back from Australia. I know you were in Sydney and Melbourne. Jason Everett, if you remember recently, had some soup poured on him, and he got awful reception down there in Australia. And you got out of Australia without being wounded? You're okay?
Yes, although I was threatened.
What?
No. Yes, believe it or not. In Melbourne, the same city where Jason was in, I was giving a talk on theology of the body. And after the talk, someone came up and challenged me about the church's teaching in this area. And they said, do you know what the Second Vatican Council, the commission that was called, during the Second Vatican Council? Yes, I'm familiar with the commission. Do you know what they said? I said, it doesn't matter what they said. What matters is what the Pope says. And the document that came out of that was Humani Vitae.
Yeah.
He goes, yeah, but do you know what the commission said? Yes, I know what the commission said, but it doesn't matter what they say. What matters is what the Pope says. And he said, well, I disagree. That was arguing. He said, I'm a Catholic school teacher, and we teach safe sex in the schools. I said, then you're not a Catholic school. Then you're a Protestant school, or you're some other school. You're not a Catholic school because what you're teaching is not the Catholic faith. I said, what basically the people that are sending their kids there are paying for a very expensive public school. He got upset, and then he kept trying to provoke to get this, kind of visceral, emotional response out of me, which was not going to happen. Been there, done that. So when he couldn't get the response that he wanted, he said he completely changed the subject, which is a typical tactic of people that have no argument. They want to appeal to the emotion. Then he said to me, are you a Democrat or a Republican? And I said, I told him the truth. I said, I'm neither. I'm independent. I can vote whoever I want. He goes, so you're not a Democrat or Republican? I said, no. And he goes, well, if you said you were a Trump supporter, I was going to punch you in the face.
Ooh, man.
And I was so stunned when he said that I just looked at him. And Charbel was standing next to me when he said this. And Charbel was like, he looked at me like I was just looking at him. And I didn't say anything in response to the gentleman. I just let him have his little anger spell. And but so Melbourne's a whole different animal. Si.
Yeah, that's what I keep hearing, and that's why I'm not going there. Well, two reasons I'm not going there. That, I don't want to get punched in the face or have soup dumped on me, and two, no one ever invites me to go there. So for those two reasons, I'm not going, but I'm glad I'm glad you got back okay. They used to teach safe sex in Catholic schools, and it was this. Sex is reserved to the lifelong commitment of a man and woman in marriage. That was very safe.
Yes, exactly. and it's safe because it's between two people that are in a covenant relationship where Jesus Christ is the heart and the soul and center of that relationship. Children raised in sex in that kind of environment, not it just ensures the safety, the physical safety, but the beauty and truth of who God is and God's love and life-giving intimacy and communion that he wants with us is expressed in that relationship that gives life to a third. So it's a participation in God's own Trinitarian life. And that's what's so beautiful about that, the intimacy of that relationship.
The number is 888-318-7884. If you'd like to talk with Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers, you are welcome to call. No threatening, please. 888-318-7884. All right, I want you to tell me about the Eucharistic Congress. First of all, what's it like? Maybe you've done it before. I don't know. But to talk in front of 35, 40,000 people, what's that like?
Yeah, so first of all, the Eucharistic Congress was amazing.
Okay.
I have to tell you, Si, I wasn't sure what to expect because, when you have an event that size, there's a lot of bureaucracy, and thought like, okay, it's going to feel very programmed. It's going to feel very, very, not pretty intense kind of thing. But it was just the opposite. It was beautiful. It was very well done, very well organized. There were people from all different branches and parts of the church that were there. There was old and young, and there was families with small kids. So many nuns from different religious orders. I couldn't even,
Yeah.
It was extraordinary. And speaking in front of that many people, I'd spoken in front of 25,000 people in the Philippines. And that was the largest group until this one. There were about 60,000 people total, but I spoke at one of the, I guess you could call it a breakout session, but it was in the Lucas Oil Stadium, and I was paired up with Dr. Ed Sri. So Dr. Sri went first, and then I went after. And from what they tell us, I think our sessions were some of the most well attended of those breakout sessions there, and it was extraordinary. It was great, this was so needed in the life of the church, and I was so honored to be part of that. And I hope that people walk away from that experience more in love with Jesus and the Eucharist than ever before. I hope adoration goes up. I hope people's love and devotion that they show Jesus to people, witness to his love in a more powerful way whenever they leave Mass and go back out into the world again.
We're going to talk about the Eucharist today with Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers. You are welcome to call with your questions, 888-318-7884. I have more respect now than before for Dr. Edward Sri because you don't go after Deacon Harold, you go before him. You don't want to follow him. That was a smart move on his part. So what did you talk about at the Eucharistic Congress?
So each day had a different theme, right? And so we spoke on Saturday, so it was kind of the last full day of the conference for the closing Mass on Sunday. So ours was about being sent forth, mission.
Okay.
The Eucharist and mission. So I talked about basically the Eucharist and evangelization, how the Eucharist, we're not allowed to keep Jesus to ourselves. We're not allowed to keep the faith to ourselves, but impels us to go out. To go back out into the world and show people Jesus, to witness to the power of his Eucharistic love to the world, to make what we receive in word and sacrament come alive in our lives so that other people can truly experience the power of God's love in their own lives when they interact with us.
Mm-hmm.
So that's basically what I talked about.
Again, we're talking about the Eucharist with Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers, host of Beacon of Truth on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. You are welcome to call with your questions about the Eucharist, 888-318-7884. I do think that for many of our, you talk about mission being a kind of almost a taking of the Eucharistic nature of the church out to other people. I think a lot of Christian communities, churches, ecclesial communities, whatever you want to say, who don't have the Eucharistic at the center, they say, well, we go on mission. We try to bring people. So what is Eucharistic about our mission? Why does the Catholic Church make such a big deal about the Eucharist at the middle of all of this?
Yeah, because the Eucharist is Jesus Christ. It's the body, blood, soul, and divinity. It's the heart of our faith. It's Christ's real and true presence, living presence with us. He promised us in Matthew chapter 28 that he's going to be with us always until the end of the world. And so our Protestant brothers and sisters that don't have that understanding of the Eucharist, they bring the word of God out, right? And, which is great. But in the holy sacrifice of the Mass, we're fed by God's word and by his body, blood, soul, divinity in the Eucharist. There's a double feeding there. And so in a sense, our brothers and sisters are bringing Christ, but they're only bringing half of the story, so which is good. I mean, half of the story is better than no story at all. But when we have the full picture, when we have the fullness of unity, when we have the fullness of truth that Christ has given to us, he's at the Last Supper. He said, "Do this in remembrance of me." He didn't say, "When you do this, remember me." Zacher in Hebrew, memory is living, memory is alive. The sense there is that the graces and blessings of that past event are made real and present now. So Christ is made real and present in the Eucharist, and it's that presence that we make real to others when we carry him forward in word and sacrament after the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass to go out to be Eucharist to the world.
Again, the number is 888-318-7884. Calls starting to come in, but there are lines open. If you have questions about the Eucharist, maybe you have questions about the Eucharistic Congress too. That would be fine. If you want to ask Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers your questions about the Congress, that's welcome. But we're talking about the Eucharist. We're in the midst of this this kind of praying and working and hoping for Eucharistic revival in the Catholic community here in the United States and around the world. If you have questions about the Eucharistic nature of the Church, about the Eucharist itself, you are welcome to call and ask. 888-318-7884.
Catch Catholic Answers live anytime at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
At EWTN Radio, your family. And because you're a part of our family, we value your opinions on what you hear on EWTN. You can call our listener comment line 24/7 at 205-795-5773. We value your comments, your questions, and any suggestions you may have to make EWTN Radio even better. 205-795-5773. And thank you for listening to EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers is our guest this hour, just back here. Well, I say back, but he's back on the West Coast anyways, after having been one of the featured speakers at the big Eucharistic Congress that the Church in the United States just experienced in Indianapolis, Indiana. And to much acclaim. I have not heard anybody saying, "Oh, that was this or that," in any negative ways. I believe people, the spirit of it. It did seem to me, Deacon, that in the months leading up to it, the spirit of it was a real willingness to make it an encounter, to go and meet Jesus there, not to have like some kind of agenda to impose. And I think that was very smartly done. That was well done, because people came back really having said they did have an encounter with Jesus there.
Yeah, absolutely. The Eucharistic adoration was full. The lines for confessions were long. I think people's longing and yearning to return to Christ in the Eucharist, especially coming out of the pandemic years, this is exactly what the churches need. Like you mentioned, Si, a Eucharistic renaissance. We saw the same kind of thing in the beginning of the 11th century, after Berengarius of Tours was the first person to deny that Jesus was present in the Eucharist, body, blood, soul, and divinity. And so that started a Eucharistic renaissance when the Pope had to correct Berengarius, and he had to sign an oath of fidelity to come back into the church. That kicked off the Eucharistic renaissance, and for hundreds of years, actually. Yeah. And part of that was St. Thomas Aquinas writing those beautiful Eucharistic hymns, O Salutaris, Tantum Ergo, Panis Angelicus. You know, so we're seeing it again, this Eucharistic renaissance, and it is so needed. And you can see the desire. One of the highlights for me, Si, was the Eucharistic procession through the streets of Indianapolis in front of the convention center there. And I think it was only a mile. But man, thousands and thousands of people processing behind our Lord Jesus Christ. And it was awesome. What a powerful sign and a powerful witness. And to see so many bishops there as well, and so many priests, the closing mass, like 25 minutes it took for the procession to come in, because there were so many seminarians, so many priests, and I was in there in line with the deacons, you know, and bishops. It was just an amazing gathering. And Cardinal Tagle, who was the former Cardinal Archbishop of Manila in the Philippines, who's now working at the Vatican, was Pope Francis's official delegate to the Eucharistic Congress. And he even mentioned that Pope Francis watched part of it as well from Rome.
Oh, that is so beautiful. I'm so happy to hear I don't know why I think I do know why, actually. The procession part makes me so happy, is that this used to be so important to Catholics, a Eucharistic procession. And we just let go of some of these treasures that we have in the church. I mean, probably not in the Philippines, they probably haven't let go of it, but certainly in a lot of the West, we've let go of it. So it's beautiful to think about that. And we can pray for all the blessings to come from that on Indiana and on the whole world. We got some calls we're going to get to. We're talking about the Eucharist this hour. If you have questions about the Eucharist, whether you're Catholic or not, you are welcome to call 888-318-7884. Deacon Harold Burke Sivers is our guest. Ken is in Omaha, Nebraska, listening on Spirit Catholic Radio. Welcome, Ken. Go ahead with your question.
Well, I came into the church about 4 years ago. And I listened to Hollow a lot of times, and I was listening to Jeff Cavin give one of the daily reflections, and he said that when he was a Protestant, he used to hear people would say, well, Jesus always talked in parables and metaphors and like that, so saying that you're going to eat his flesh and drink his blood was just another one of those. It didn't really mean what it sounded like he said. So I'm not really sure how to, if I hear that, I'm not really sure how to come back at that. It just kind of stuck with me for a long time. So
okay.
Thought I would just bring that up.
Well, okay, thank you, Ken, and praise God that 4 years ago you came into the full communion with the church. Deacon, how do we address that, this idea that, look, okay, John 6, the 6th chapter of John, all this talk about the bread of life coming down and us eating his flesh and drinking his blood, this is just Jesus talking in parables like he usually does.
Yeah, this is a great question. What's so awesome about this particular section in John 6 is that we're going to be hearing this in the Sunday readings for the next several weeks. We're getting into this bread of life discourse. We're going to hear this Sunday about Jesus feeding the 5,000. He feeds them physically, and then he feeds them spiritually in the bread of life discourse. And so when Jesus is talking, him about, I'm the bread that came down from heaven. Unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no life. He's not speaking as a parable. Why? Because when the people heard him say this, well, first of all, they murmured at him twice. Once because he said, I'm the bread that came down from heaven. Right now, why did that upset people? Because they're thinking back now to the book of Exodus, when God fed his people twice a day, every day for 40 years with the manna from heaven. Now, Jesus is referring him as himself. I am the one that has come from God in order to sustain his people. So that would have sounded confusing. So they were murmuring amongst themselves. And Jesus doesn't take it back. He continues, I'm the bread that came down from heaven. And then he continues, I'm the bread that comes down from heaven that man may eat of it and not die. Right. And he says, eat my flesh and drink my blood. And so they said, how can this man give us his flesh to eat? So what they heard was Jesus speaking literally, not figuratively. If Jesus was speaking in a parable, they wouldn't have been upset because, he's just speaking figuratively. But they heard him out of his own mouth equate himself like eating his flesh and blood, like his literal flesh and blood. And so when he said that, when he saw how the people were upset, he doesn't step back and say, oh, wait a minute. I was only speaking in a parable. I was only speaking figuratively. That's not what I meant. No, he doubles down. He said, he who eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day. For my flesh is food indeed, and my blood is drink indeed. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood lives in me, and I in him. And when he said that, the people turned away from him. They walked away from him because they heard him literally. Now, sometimes when Jesus speaks in parables, he explains what he means, right? Because sometimes he says a parable and the apostles pull him to the side and say, okay, Jesus, what do you mean by that? And Jesus says, well, here's what this means. And he explains. He doesn't do that here. When they walk away from him, he turns to his apostles and say, what about you guys? Are you guys going to go too? And what does Peter say? Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. So Jesus was definitely not speaking metaphorically or symbolically or as in a parable in the bread of life discourse in John chapter 6.
Ken, does that help you? Does that satisfy you?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I appreciate your help. I'm a big fan of the deacons because I remember when last time he was in Omaha, I went to see him and got to talk to him a little bit there. So thank you very much. I appreciate it a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Thanks very much. On we go. Let's see. We'll get another question in before we take the break. Vincent's in Pennsylvania. Vincent, thank you for your call. Go ahead with your question for Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers.
My question is, what graces are received when a Catholic receives the Eucharist, and is it necessary for salvation?
Yes, great question. So there are a number of graces, including the forgiveness of venial sin is forgiven during receiving the sacrament of the Eucharist. You have sacramental grace, which is received, like all the sacraments give us different graces that move us closer to God. Is the Eucharist necessary for salvation? Jesus says, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no life in you, okay? Now, having said that, baptism is tied to salvation. Now, here's the key that Catechism teaches. God has bound salvation to the sacrament of baptism, but God is not bound by his sacraments, okay? So, for example, if you have someone who's not baptized, but they have the desire to become a Christian, to be united with Christ in that way, there's something called baptism by desire. Right? They have a desire to be intimate with Christ, but they may not have made it to baptism. But someone that can't receive the Eucharist, it sustains us in our journey toward heaven. But there are people, for example, that are sick that cannot receive the Eucharist. Someone that's in a coma, or someone that has like say they have cancer of the esophagus and they can't swallow, so they can't actually take in the Eucharist. So they're not receiving the graces. That doesn't mean that they're not going to also have salvation as well. So salvation is received through the sacrament of baptism, and sustained and nurtured and fed and strengthened by the Eucharist to sustain us on that journey of faith. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
All right, Vincent, thank you. Thanks very much. Our number is 888-318-7884. We're talking with Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers, just back from the big Eucharistic Congress in Indianapolis, Indiana, also just back from Australia. He's a traveler. He gets around. And we have him here to talk about the Eucharist. If you have questions about the Eucharist, you're very welcome here. If you don't know anything about the Eucharist, if you don't even know what we're talking about, you can call and ask that. If you know a lot about the Eucharist and you got an advanced question, you can call and ask that as well. The number is 888-318-7884. We'll be right back with more conversation about the Eucharist with Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers. We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun, and that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron.
Deepen your connection to the Church's holy days and seasons while you draw on the wisdom of the Church Fathers. Feasts of Our Fathers, the new book from Mike Aquilina and Adam Lucas, is a treasury of history, prayers, insights, and lessons that will bring you closer to the earliest of Catholic traditions. Take your prayer life and your solidarity with the Church, past and present, to a new level. Order your copy of Feasts of Our Fathers today at shop.catholic.com.
When the resurrected Jesus appeared to disciples on the road to Emmaus, they didn't recognize him until the breaking of the bread. The same is true today. In the Holy Eucharist, we really meet Jesus. In The Eucharist is Really Jesus, author Joe Heschmeyer explains how knowing Jesus in the Eucharist is the key to understanding all of Christian faith. Order your copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore.
Matt Swaim here. Join us for the best of the Sunrise Morning Show with summer reading suggestions, pilgrimage ideas, and tips for incorporating your faith into summer activities. Now back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Just a few more days left in the month of July. I tell you that just for this reason. The $50 off the ticket to our conference ends on the last day of July. So now's a good time to go to CatholicAnswersConference.com and see if it's something you'd like to come to. We're going to talk about the parables and sayings of Jesus Christ, and it is going to be just a fantastic gathering. For the second year in a row, Dr. Scott Hahn will be there, but Kimberly Hahn's coming this time, and Jimmy Aiken and Tim Staples will be there, Father Sebastian Walsh, Billy Junker, all of our apologists will do the radio show from there. We have a great time, and we'd love it if you'd come. Go to CatholicAnswersConference.com to find out all about it. CatholicAnswersConference.com. This hour on Catholic Answers Live, Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers is our guest, and he did his show, and now he's on with us, and then he's going to do a talk. He is tireless in his willingness to go and share the gospel wherever and whenever. And if you've got a question for him, now's the time, because I can tell you when you see him give a talk, there's going to be 30 other people after the talk that want to talk with him. So pick up that phone and call 888-318-7884. Going back to Nebraska now. Deacon Harold, I think you're big in Nebraska. Now you
No,
got
just in Spirit Catholic Radio, I do their biblical reflections every couple of months or so.
Oh,
Yeah.
Do you ever rest? Is there? Do you ever take any time off? All right, Dominic in Nebraska, go ahead with your question for Deacon Harold.
Hi. How would I convince a Protestant that the Eucharist, for the 1,500-year history from when the Catholic Church was started up till the Protestant Reformation, that the Eucharist wasn't just a symbol in the church, and that it was truly seen by everyone as the true presence of Jesus?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, you have to recognize you can't convince anybody of anything. The belief in the Eucharist also comes down to faith. You can make the greatest arguments in the world, but all you're doing is throwing seeds, right? It's God that has to till the soil and give it fertilizer and sunlight and allow the seed of faith to grow in that person's heart. You can't do that. Only God can do that. That's the first thing to recognize. The second one is this: look at the words of Jesus in the in Matthew, Mark, and Luke's gospel, the synoptic gospels. Not in John, because John doesn't have the Last Supper narrative, but in the three. For example, Luke 22:19, it says, "This is my body." Literally, tauto estin to soma moi. This is the body of me. Now, how do we know, what does that mean when the person is speaking that? If you ask any Greek scholar, they will tell you that the writer is using the demonstrative adjective, well, in this case, Luke, the demonstrative adjective this, and what do adjectives modify nouns? So whatever this is making an absolute identification with the object of the sentence, with the soma, which is body. Now, if that was bread that he was holding, you would see the Greek word artos, which means bread. But instead you see soma, which means body. So literally saying this is the body. Whatever this is, whatever he's holding in his hand, he's equating that unequivocally with his physical body. And the only way you can get a different explanation is something called eisegesis. Exegesis is when you read a text and you extract the meaning from the text. Eisegesis is when you read your own meaning into the text. So now the text doesn't mean what it actually says. It means what you want it to mean, and that's not honest. You have to look at what the text says for itself. So in fact, I had an atheist Greek scholar explain this exact thing to me. The person who's speaking, saying, this is my body, saying he's making an absolute identification between himself and the physical thing that he's holding in his hand, right? So, and the only way you can get a different meaning is you make it mean something else. That's just and that goes perfectly when we were talking about John 6 earlier, when Jesus eat my flesh and drink my blood. They heard him literally because he was speaking literally, not figuratively. Does that help?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
All right, Dominic, thank you. Thanks very much. That's very, there's something really persuasive about that. I mean, like you said, you can't make someone else believe it, but this is my body. He's not. Where's the wiggle room in that?
Well, the thing is, there's precedence for back in the Old Testament about consuming the bread and the presence of God being in the bread. Back then it was figuratively in the Old Testament, where it talks about the lechem hapanim, the bread of the presence, or the bread of the face. Whose presence, whose face? God's presence, God's face. In fact, the book of Leviticus says that whenever the lechem hapanim was in the tabernacle, there had to be a light that was continually lit whenever the bread of the presence, the bread of the face was in the tabernacle. And to this day, we have a sanctuary light that's lit whenever the Eucharist is in the tabernacle. See, so we have some parallels between the Old Testament and the New Testament, which makes perfect sense. Jesus said, I have not come to abolish the law and the prophets, but to fulfill them. So Jesus in the Eucharist is the fulfillment of this idea of the lechem hapanim in the Old Testament.
Wow. Dominic, thanks very much for the call. We're talking about the Eucharist with Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers. Tony's in Los Angeles, California, watching on YouTube. We're glad you're here, Tony. Go ahead with your question for Deacon Harold.
All right. Yeah, hi, good afternoon. So Yeah, I read that John 6 very literally, as the church teaches. This is a literal interpretation. And what they're saying is take the bread and the wine. They're not saying, Jesus didn't say take the bread or the wine. Now, my problem is I can't find any church or any parish that will offer the wine. So my plan is I'm going to sneak in a bottle, like an airplane bottle of wine, and I'm going to consume it after I go up and take the body of Christ. My question is, if I do that with that intent of that it being the blood, will it turn into the blood by doing this procedure?
Okay. A couple things. First of all, no. I would definitely not do that. Here's the thing. The Eucharist exists, body, blood, soul, divinity, under two species, right? So what looks like and appears to be bread, and what looks like and appears to be wine. So Christ is present fully, body, blood, soul, divinity, in both species. The only one that's required to receive both at Mass is the priest, okay? So when you receive the host, you're receiving the full body, blood, soul, divinity of Jesus, okay? When you receive at Mass, the precious body and the precious blood, it's a fuller sign of that reception. It's a fuller sign of when you receive both. But Christ is fully present, either if you just consume the Eucharist, the host, or the precious blood. He's there fully under both species. But I would not bring my own bottle and, somehow, because the priest, it's not your intention, it's the priest's intention to consecrate. If he doesn't know you have a bottle of wine and you just kind of keep it under your coat, and when the priest consecrates, he goes, well, I am intending. It's not your intention, it's the priest's intention that brings about the sacrament. So you have to have the right matter, the right form, and the intention to do what the church does. And so that's the issue there. That makes sense?
Oh, wait, hang on. I put Dominic on hold. I'm sorry.
Go.
Dominic, did that make sense to you? Oh, I'm sorry. This is not Dominic. It's Tony in Los Angeles. Tony, does that make sense to you?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. All right. Well, what was Deacon's answer right at the beginning? Just no. That was how he started that answer. We better take a quick break. We'll be right back with more questions. We're talking about the Eucharist. Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers is our guest. 888-318-7884 is the number. There's a couple lines open. If you'd like to get in the queue, now's the time to do it. 888-318-7884.
This is Archbishop Paul Coakley, the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, and you're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Who was the first Catholic in your family? Were they evangelized by a friend, a coworker, a stranger? Did you ever think that you could be that person that God uses to save a soul? And that soul could save their family, their grandchildren, and generations to come. At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we train, equip, and mobilize Catholic disciples to do the urgent work of evangelization. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
Carry the faith wherever you go. Watch the EWTN series, specials, events, and news streaming live from anywhere in the world. Streaming is available on the EWTN app for Apple, Android, and Amazon devices. Download the EWTN app at EWTNapps.com today.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. It's so good to get to talk about the Eucharist with Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers on a Friday afternoon. You're very welcome to call. I know that for some of you it's Saturday morning, including our many friends that we have in Melbourne, Australia. Melbourne, Australia, where Catholics are the most popular people in Melbourne, Australia. So you're welcome to call from Saturday if you want, 888-318-7884. Deacon Harold, I kid a little bit, but there are wonderful Catholics in Australia. There's a beautiful Catholic community there.
Oh, absolutely. And particularly the Maronite Catholics as well. I think that there's the most Maronite Catholics or Catholics from Lebanon in Australia. They have the most Maronites outside of Lebanon are in Australia. They're vibrant, they're alive, they're dynamic, they're on fire. And I think they serve as I think Cardinal Pell once said, the Maronite Church serves as the heartbeat for the church in Australia. Because the Latin Rite churches are suffering from the same things that we're seeing here in the United States, with mass attendance being down, not much passion and fervor about the Eucharist. Although at the Eucharistic Congress, Bishop Umbers, who is an auxiliary bishop in Sydney, who actually I knew when he was still a priest before he was ordained a bishop, was there with a contingent, because they're looking to get the International Eucharistic Congress in Australia in 2028.
Oh, wonderful!
Yeah,
wonderful.
So they're waiting to get confirmation back from the Vatican, but they were there to take a look at things and to get some ideas for how they may want to do it there in Australia in 2028.
We're talking about the Eucharist. Kevin is in Missouri, listening on 1460 AM. Kevin, we're glad you're here. Go ahead with your question for Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers.
Oh, I'm sorry, I don't have a question. I just have a testimony about the Eucharist. I'm a lifelong Catholic. About a year ago, I was listening to Father Ed Broom. He teaches a class on the Eucharist, and he teaches many classes on Catholicism. And he talked about when we receive the Holy Eucharist, we receive the perfect health of Jesus when we receive the Holy Eucharist. And I'm 65, and I had like 3 different undiagnosed illnesses throughout my life. And I always noticed that when I returned to my house after receiving Holy Communion and going to Mass, that I always felt so much better. And then it clicked when I saw the YouTube video from Father Ed Broom that, when we receive Jesus in the Holy Eucharist, we receive his perfect health, and we can be healed. And that was my experience over decades of just receiving the Holy Eucharist, and I never really put the two together until a year ago when I listened to Father Ed Broom and his teaching on the Holy Eucharist. I also pray a prayer from St. Bernard to the wound in the shoulder. I don't know if you know that prayer, but it's Jesus, when Jesus carried the cross, he said that was I think he said it was the most painful wound he actually received on the day he was killed.
Isn't that?
And after I received I pray that prayer every day. At least I try to, for over a year. And last year, after I received Holy Communion, Jesus placed in my mind an image of his crucifixion with his most grievous wound, and he showed me that just all this blood pouring down from his left shoulder. And I just made the connection. I've been praying that prayer for over a year. And so those are my testimonies about the Holy Eucharist.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Thank you for sharing them. I appreciate that. I had St. Bernard. I didn't know about the wound in the shoulder part, but I do remember that St. Bernard of Clairvaux, of course, the great medieval saint, probably the great man of the medieval period in many ways, in conversations with Jesus, because he would have conversations with Jesus, he told him the hardest thing he ever did was carry the cross. So thank you very much for the testimony. And I'm God heals where he wills, but I know God heals. And I know there's much healing associated with the Eucharist.
Oh, yeah. Christ is a divine physician.
Right.
And I think one of the best ways to find the healing, not so much miraculous physical healing, although that is definitely possible, but coming before our Lord in Eucharistic adoration and just letting his presence, the light from his presence, just flow into your life and flow into your heart, to be in the presence with him, to open your heart to him in that most blessed sacrament, when you're literally face to face with God and allowing his healing love to just pour into you. That's why the sacrament of reconciliation is so important as well. We empty ourselves of all those things that separate us from God's love, so that God can just pour his grace and his merciful love into our hearts.
Kevin, thank you. It's beautiful to receive testimony about Christ in the Eucharist, and thank you for sharing it with us. Tim's in Wyoming, watching on Facebook. Tim, welcome. Go ahead with your question for Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers.
Hi, Deacon. If a person dies with temporal sin from going to confession, and then afterwards they take the Eucharist, which forgives venial sins, does the person still go to purgatory for the temporal sins, or does the Eucharist take care of that too? And if not, why can't the Eucharist remove temporal sin and the need for purgatory?
Oh, okay. So you're talking about that they receive viaticum? You mean before they die, right? I want to make sure I understand what you're saying.
Viaticum is the bread?
Yes, the Eucharist, not the bread, the Eucharist. Yeah, okay. All right. So there's several different fruits of the Eucharist, right? It sustains us in the supernatural life. It remits, it protects us against future sins. It curbs the urge of concupiscence. In other words, those desires that separate us from God's love. It gives us spiritual joy. But it also remits sin, both venial sin and part of the temporal punishment due to sin. Okay? Not the full temporal punishment due to sin. Because remember, there's two effects of sin. There's the eternal punishment of sin and the temporal effects of sin. The eternal punishment of sin is forgiven in the sacrament of reconciliation. The temporal punishment of sin on earth while you're still alive is through indulgences or after death in purgatory. So receiving the Eucharist is a partial remission of the temporal punishment of sin. So even after, now, unless you, you still have to go through, because even after you go to confession, you still sin after confession. There's still those temporal effects of sin. And the Eucharist only removes part of that. So there's still some temporal punishment sin that needs to be forgiven. And then after you die, that will be done in purgatory.
Okay.
Okay, Tim?
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you for the call. I'm going to keep moving, try to get everybody on with Deacon Harold before we have to go. Next hour, Dr. Matthew Bunson from EWTN News will be here with us. As a matter of fact, the Vice President for News over at EWTN. We're going to talk about the church in the news. Your questions are welcome for that hour. Let's go to Beaverton, Oregon now. Don is in Beaverton, listening on KBVM Radio. Don, welcome. Go ahead with your question for Deacon Harold.
Okay, I've got a quick comment first. My daughter lives in Indianapolis. 2 years ago for my birthday, she took me to my first NFL game in Indianapolis. And I couldn't help but sit there and wonder, how can we ever get this many people here for something related to God?
Wow!
So it's pretty amazing what God can do.
Isn't that great?
Yes,
He did it. He did it.
Absolutely.
Yep. And my question really quick is that when I go to confession, I try to make sure that I remember everything and work it all out, but how can I be certain? I'm very concerned about receiving communion unworthily, either a sin I forgot or anything like that would make me unworthy to receive communion.
Yeah, great question. So if you look at there's a biblical basis for what you're saying, actually. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, St. Paul is very clear. Let a man examine himself and receive the body and blood of Christ. Because if you receive unworthily, that's why some of you are sick and some of you are ill and some have died. Very strong language from Paul about receiving the Eucharist unworthily. Okay, so the best way to ensure that is through the sacrament of reconciliation. But you have to be careful about over-scrupulosity. So when you're in the confessional, you're confessing all the sins that you remember in kind and in number. I've committed this type of sin this many times. And you want to be honest about that. Now, if there's a sin that you honestly did not remember after you left the confessional, but you intended to confess that sin, the sin is forgiven. But although you can also go back, if you feel that guilty about it, you can go back again to receive, can go back to confession again. But if you had the intention of confessing that sin, but legitimately forgot, that sin is also forgiven, and that is the best way to prepare yourself to receive Jesus. Because if you go with mortal sin, you're dead, and the Eucharist is a sacrament of the living. Sacrament of reconciliation is for the dead.
Don, I'm going to leave it there and keep going because but like I said, I want to get everybody on with Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers. We're talking about the Eucharist with Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers, who was one of the featured speakers at the recent Eucharistic Congress in Indianapolis, Indiana, where God got a full NFL stadium full of people to show up. And that's pretty awesome when you think about it. Lewis is in Nebraska. Well, come on, really? Nebraska is coming through for Deacon Harold today, listening on Spirit Catholic Radio. Lewis, go ahead with your question for Deacon.
Yes, my question is, I guess the Eucharist, when you say before you receive it, if something happens, we dissolve it in water, and before we dispose of it in the ground. I was just curious what the Catholic teaching is on after we consume it, like. What happens is the body, blood, soul, and divinity absorbed into our body, and the Eucharist loses that.
I got you. I think. Do you have it, Deacon? Yeah. Okay.
I see what he's saying. So what you're talking about, for example, if the Eucharist, for example, falls on the ground, or it falls on the ground, someone steps on it, so it can't be consumed, but it's still Christ. Well, what do you do with that? So typically, what happens is they take the Eucharist, they put it in some water, and it breaks down the host. It breaks it down. And when it's no longer distinguishable to be the host, then they dump it down what's called the sacrarium. Not a sink that goes into the sewer system, but it's a special sink in the sacristy that goes straight into the ground. Okay? Now, using that same principle, Lewis, when you consume the Eucharist and the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass, you're receiving the graces, the same graces and the same blessings that poured from that cross on Good Friday 2,000 years ago. You're receiving those same graces and same blessings when you consume the Eucharist. Once you consume the Eucharist, it gets into your body and it breaks down, and it's no longer, the Eucharist is no longer the host. It dissolves into your body. Then it's no longer the host, the Christ body, blood, soul, divinity is no longer there. But literally, think about this. There's something beautiful in what you're saying here, Lewis, because when you receive regular food, that food turns into you, right? You eat burgers, you eat, salad, that nourishes you, and that becomes part of you. When you receive the Eucharist, you become part of Christ. Right, and so yes, it breaks down, and it takes about 7-8 minutes, maybe 10 minutes for that process to happen. But you're receiving those graces and your blessings as long as the Eucharist is sustained. But once it breaks down, it is no longer Christ. It ceases to be the Eucharist at that point.
Okay. So I think I got that, Lewis. I want to see if you got that. Did that make sense to you?
It does.
Okay. All right. Very good. So in other words, as long as it's recognizable as bread, then Jesus is still there, body, blood, soul, and divinity.
Correct. And here's another one, Si. If say some precious blood spilled on a carpet, like say your church has a carpet, it spills on the carpet. What you do is you take water and you pour that water into the carpet where the precious blood, and once it breaks down, and it's just mostly water and no longer what appears to be wine, but it's mostly water, then you can take a purificator and dab that up.
Yeah.
Because it's no longer the precious blood. Because once that all breaks down and it's no longer the what looks like the accident, the philosophical accident, what looks like bread, and not distinguishable as wine anymore, or distinguishable as bread anymore. I'm talking about the philosophical accidents now. Then you can clean that up and then dispose of it in a very reverent way.
Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers helping us out while he's between doing other things and traveling and all those kinds. Oh, I forgot to mention, you have at deaconharold.com, you have pilgrimages next year, and you're doing a bunch of great pilgrimages like Mary and the Saints and the St. Paul and the early church pilgrimage. I know you're going to Poland, and so I want to encourage people to go check it out. If you want to do a pilgrimage with Deacon Harold, check out deaconharold.com. Just click the pilgrimage tab. Deacon, may we have your blessing before you go?
Sure. May Almighty God bless you, keep you, and protect you on this beautiful weekend. the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Deacon. It's always great to get to visit with you.
Great to be with you as always, Si. God bless you.
And all right, coming up, we've got Dr. Matthew Bunson will be here, and he knows all about the news. If you've got questions about the church and the news, if there's something happening in the church you'd like to ask about, 888-318-7884. Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. I have to say, in the last 2 minutes, I got really fired up for this hour. And I love it when Dr. Matthew Bunson is here. But it wasn't him that got me fired up. In today's news in blasphemy, I'll let him share it. But of course, Dr. Matthew Bunson, our guest, is well known to those of you who pay any attention at all to the world of EWTN. He's vice president and editorial director of EWTN News, and does all kinds of other things. But like I said, I'm all fired up, so I want to get right into it. First of all, Dr. Matthew Bunson, thank you so much for being here with us.
Oh, great to be with you, as always.
Well, so paganism seems to be going well. Why don't you? Darren said, look at this clip before you go on the air with Dr. Bunson. So all I have done is look at the clip. Could you please tell me what I'm looking at?
Well, what you're looking at, apparently, now the footage is always delayed. So what we're talking about, for those who may not be following this on social media, and I would encourage you to do so, is the Olympics in Paris have begun. They had the opening ceremony this evening, and it will be broadcast. It's broadcast now internationally. It'll be broadcast to the U.S. audience starting probably just about half an hour or so. And part of the opening ceremonies include, apparently, a depiction of the beheaded Marie Antoinette, establishing immediately the anti-monarchist tendencies of the French Republic. But what everyone's really talking about is apparently a drag queen depiction of the Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci, followed then by a variety of additional drag queens who are parading through the streets of Paris. As you can imagine, the response has been predictable. I think there's a lot we can talk about in this regard. The immediate reaction, of course, has been what we'd imagine it would be. And it isn't just, to use the phrase, pearl clutching. I think people are genuinely horrified at what they're seeing, including many French who have been, I've been following it on X, what used to be Twitter, expressing their outrage and embarrassment that this type of a performance would be undertaken, certainly to open something as universal as the Olympic Games.
I mean, there is Olympic Games are at root a pagan thing. I mean, not that pagan stuff is bad. I'm not saying that makes it evil or something, but I wasn't thinking until just a few moments ago that what the world needed was a drag queen depiction of the Last Supper. That wasn't on my list of artistic achievements we were lacking previously.
Yeah, somebody said on Twitter that I didn't have that on my bingo card for tonight.
No, that is a.
But here's the thing, and I think this is one of the keys to stress here. Millions and millions of euros have been spent in the preparations for these games.
Yeah.
The city of Paris has been under construction, under renovation. The Cathedral of Notre Dame has been under reconstruction for years, with the goal of having it ready for the Olympic Games. Millions and millions more euros have been spent preparing for the opening ceremonies. Now, in fairness, opening ceremonies have always been historically something of a really mixed bag of imagery and music, and part of the oddity of the opening of Olympic Games is trying to understand the imagery, what exactly we're watching.
What am I seeing? Yes.
What am I seeing? That's especially true with the Winter Games because you're even more circumscribed by the weather. In this case, we have to come to grips with the fact that this was long in preparation. This is highly choreographed. It was prepared. They knew exactly what they were doing. So any idea that this is somehow a surprise to people, that they were blindsided by a sudden performance of a drag queen rendition of The Last Supper simply won't fly. So what we can immediately deduce is that I'm sure we'll get more details about this over the next few days, and I look forward to that. But this was deliberate. This was choreographed. It was rehearsed. It was planned and has been planned for months.
So what we've heard is and maybe you know something about this. I don't know that there's a kind of very small scale but real resurgence of Catholic faith in France. That people are kind of recovering some of their Catholicity. So
this is true. Yeah. We saw just this last Easter significant upticks in the numbers of conversions among French Catholics into the church. We have seen as well a number of conversions from Islam to Catholicism. We had a very impressive procession of Chartres with the banners and everything that you'd expect. It was a beautiful pilgrimage. So you're right. There has been, in the last few years, something of a resurgence. Also, the traditional Latin Mass has some of its strongest bastions anywhere in the church in France. Now, we'll see if there might be new restrictions coming. That's the rumor. But it's an indicator, I think, of a definite response to two things. I think the massive cultural upheaval that we're seeing in France as a result of mass migration, but also just the sheer progress, relentless march of relativism and secularism. Now, that's in many ways built into the DNA of the French Republic from the time of the French Revolution. In the 20th century, we've seen, and into the 21st, we've seen the continuation of the longstanding French policy called laïcité, which is this idea of the French state owning everything and being highly, highly secular. This takes it to a new level.
It does. If you want to talk about the church in the news, it doesn't have to be about this event at the Olympics. Anything you'd like to talk about with Dr. Matthew Bunson, you're welcome to call 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. And, I think nobody's going to bother you if you have a procession of drag queens. I want to just kind of make clear for those who maybe don't understand why this is the central celebration and one of the central mysteries of the Christian faith. The Eucharist, as celebrated at the Last Supper, is the center of everything we do. And so if you treat that as if it's something, I don't know whether this is mocking or it's just trivialized. I don't know which thing it is, but either of those is really, really bad.
Yes, and it's, as I was saying a minute ago, that this is a deliberate choreographed display.
Yeah.
Now, as I said, I'm sure there will be explanations. There's going to be a furious, ferocious backlash to this. But I think, in many ways, the organizers are content if there is that type of a backlash because they seek this sort of publicity. But also, they're sending a message, I think, that in culture, you capture the high ground. They have been very good at capturing the language of the high ground of culture. We see that in the way that language is now so plastic, that we can use terms for like gender affirming care, that sort of thing. But now they're also using powerful imagery, propaganda, and they're now layering it into programs like the opening ceremonies of the Olympics. So we have to be very much aware that this is a very sophisticated, incredibly financed undertaking. And it is, as I said, deliberate, and it's sending a clear message that Christianity is open for mockery. It's open for the type of belittlement that we're seeing now in culture, that nothing is sacred. No. However, we can also note that it is, and I'm sure this has already been said repeatedly on Twitter, that the other religions are probably off limits.
Yeah.
You will not see them mocked in the way that Christianity is.
No, they're not going to have a drag queen depiction of the Hajj in Paris. 888-318-7884 is the number. 888-318-7884. I mean, God has a plan in all of this, and sometimes the outrage is helpful to us. One thing that I can tell you this. I'm going to be. Don't try to get in touch with me the next few weeks. I'm going to be very, very busy ignoring the Olympics, so I won't be available for anyone who's looking for me because it's going to take all my energy to completely ignore the Olympics now. But one thing that did happen today that's quite lovely is the ringing of the bells at Notre Dame.
Well, that's right. And that it makes this episode tonight apparently such a tragedy and such an outrage, because the French have been very focused, and to his credit, Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, has been determined over the last years since the fire. A lot of questions still hover in the air about what caused that fire. We take their word that it was, I believe, at the time an electrical fire that started. But the reconstruction of Notre Dame became something of a national phenomenon.
Yeah.
It is one of the great cultural landmarks for France. It is one of the great cultural landmarks for Europe. But it is, of course, the cathedral for Paris. And its construction was a result of centuries of work by dedicated, faithful, devout Christians. And so the reconstruction, as you can imagine then, it didn't just cost a lot of money, it also required the resources with the imagination. And there was that vital moment when they were making the decisions about whether to rebuild and how to rebuild, what it was going to look like. And there were plans, and it ties in some ways to what we're seeing tonight with the Olympic Games. There were plans to modernize the interior and some of the exterior of Notre Dame. There was a plan at one point that was being put forward to have like a garden on the top. They wanted to remove some of the crosses, as I recall. They wanted to have an interfaith center on the roof. All of these proposals were put forward. All of them were subsequently demolished, however, by the French people themselves, that no, we want the restoration of Notre Dame exactly as it was, but built to safety codes that we have now. So the French people themselves have been very committed to this rebuilding. And to hear those bells then ringing across the city of Paris on the Ile de la Cité, where the cathedral is based, is centered, must have been a great moment. And then to have it besmirched as they have tonight, I think it's a genuine tragedy.
Dr. Matthew Bunson is our guest, and if you'd like to talk about the church in the news, there's just, the church is big. There's always a church in the news, so you're welcome to call with whatever your question might be. But when we come back, we'll talk a little bit. We talked with Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers, who spoke at the conference, at the Congress, the Eucharistic Congress a few days ago. And when we come back, I'd like to ask you about the Eucharistic Congress, what has happened and what is happening in this quest for this prayerful quest, I guess you might say, for a Eucharistic revival in the Church in the United States. We'll do that right after this. Your questions welcome, 888-318-7884.
Miss a show? Make sure to catch up by downloading the podcast, available online at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features texts of daily Mass, prayers, articles, meditations, art commentaries, and more, in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church, on the web at magnificat.com.
Another weekend means another chance for us to build our community of faith on this weekend's Catholics Coast to Coast. I'm Ace McKay and invite you to join me as we highlight the conversations happening. Go to Podcast Central at EWTN.com/radio. That way you can take them with you, share them, like, subscribe, follow, whatever you need to do so you don't miss future episodes. So join me for Catholics Coast to Coast tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. I haven't calmed down yet from the video that Darren gave me. I think it came from Dr. Bunson right just before we went on the air.
Sorry for that.
Yeah, well, it's all right. It's good for my blood pressure to go up every now and then, get everything cleared out, and then. But really quite shocking. One doesn't want to be shocked anymore. I think you want to be sanguine, but I don't have that kind of blood to be sanguine sometimes. But
well, part of it, I mean, you mentioned that you were planning to spend weeks tuning out the Olympics.
Yeah.
From my family history, from the earliest times that I could remember, the earliest Olympics that I can remember was 1972, the Summer Games in Munich, which of course were yes, you know the history.
Yeah.
The brutal terrorist attack on the Israeli athletes that was marked oddly enough, perversely by, I think it was, I'm trying to remember, I think it was Nike with a shoe ad campaign with a very pro-Palestinian spokesperson. And part of it is they simply have no historical memory for what happens 50 years ago.
Right.
But those games have always been a significant part of, they were huge in my upbringing when I was growing up in Hawaii. And I've always been a huge fan, especially of the Winter Olympics. So looking forward to the Olympics, but it's increasingly difficult now.
Every time do you have the strangest life? I don't mean this as an insult, but you grew up in Hawaii, a fan of the Winter Olympics. That's what's up with you? Every time I learn something new about you, I'm like, this is the most interesting person. Do you like Dos Equis?
Well, it's partly because if you grow up in Hawaii and you begin to encounter winter, you really enjoy it.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that's the case. Yeah. And it gets you. There's some snow in Hawaii. I know there are mountains that they get snow on there.
They do, yeah, on the top of Mount Haleakala on the island of Maui. Yeah, you can actually, I think in the past you could go skiing, but let's just say the snow ended very abruptly.
Oh. By the way, the number is 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. Dr. Matthew Bunson is our guest. I do want to ask you about the Congress. What's the general sense? I mean, you know a lot about the church and what's being said. What's the general sense of how it went and the fruits of it?
Well, I think the best way to describe it is that this was a immense success, and from the very beginning, when the bishops began proposing, it goes all the way back, I think, to 2021, when the bishops were debating what to do about the issue of Eucharistic coherence, and then they came upon the need for, very clear need for Eucharistic revival in the country. And from there, it just took off. There were a lot of questions about how much this was going to cost, whether you could actually bring people together in the modern environment. I mean, we can go back to 1926 and one of the great Eucharistic congresses just outside of Chicago that had 1 million people. And so the serious question was raised, and people were very dubious. Can this work? Well, the answer was it can. That 50 to 60,000 Catholics gathered at Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis and the Indiana Convention Center in the middle of the summer to do just one thing, and that is to revive, to deepen their love of the Eucharist. And here we were just talking about the Last Supper. To be able to accomplish that, I think, was an immense feat. But more than even, you could argue, the conference itself, the gathering of the Eucharistic revival in Indianapolis, it was how it got there. Our Lord processed across the United States on 4 Eucharistic routes. So the Eucharist was literally crossing, figuratively also, the country from east, west, north, and south, and all of those paths converging on Indianapolis. And the processions that took place there, 50,000 people in relative terms compared to the tens of millions of Catholics in the United States seems very small. In fact, we know that the processions touched hundreds of thousands of lives as they made their way across the country. So the bishops very wisely understood that this had to be a multi-year process. So as we're thinking and trying to assess the success of something like the National Eucharistic Congress and the Eucharistic Revival, we have to be thinking in terms of that over the years. And then the big question coming out of it now is, where do we go from here? How do we make sure that this isn't simply a one and done event, which unfortunately is the chronic problem, especially in the post-conciliar church.
And what are the answers to that? Are there people who have answers to that seem useful to you?
Yeah, I think there is already talk about another Eucharistic Congress in some years. I think those details are going to be coming out. But the bishops also built this Eucharistic revival from a couple of different mindsets. The first was, let's have these multi-years where we can focus on preparing for the revival. We had this year of the pilgrimages leading to Indianapolis. Now we're going to have another year where we go out. So there was this a kind of commissioning. There was a sending out of the participants at the revival itself in Indy. It's been described, I know by one person in particular, because I follow him on X, which is Father Aquinas Gilbo, one of the great Dominican priests here in Washington, D.C., who's one of the chaplains at Catholic University of America, who's also one of the hosts for EWTN's coverage of the Congress over the last weekend. And he was making the point that he sees this, and this has been echoed by others, as very similar to the 1993 World Youth Day in Denver, when John Paul II came to the United States and something fantastic happened.
Yeah.
We still talk about that.
Yeah.
I know priests personally who found their vocations as young men in Denver in 1993. There are young women I know now who also found their vocations in religious life in Denver. I think in the coming years, we're going to hear similar testimonies from people who were at the Eucharistic Congress, who were really transformed by this and felt truly sent to go out now into culture. And it's obvious that we need to have this happen.
Yeah. Is there any way that it could be more regular, or is that not in the quality of what a Eucharistic Congress is?
Well, it takes years and unfortunately a lot of money to prepare something like this.
Mm-hmm.
So there are ideas, I understand, like 9 years from now, so 2033.
Oh, that's a
which
good
should
year.
make sense.
Yeah.
It's a very good year. There's a logic to it. But I suspect that one of the things that we'll start seeing on a more regular basis, and this has been something that's been happening in recent years, are diocesan or even state Eucharistic congresses.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a massive organization nationally. You don't have to have this every year. It's far too difficult to organize those logistics. But on a local level, a diocesan or a state level, absolutely you can. But then we also have this year, let's not forget, in September is the next International Eucharistic Congress in Quito, Ecuador.
So tell me about the International Eucharistic Congress, because now that I'm hearing about Eucharistic Congresses, I want to know more about them. Is that a regular thing?
Yes, it is. Well, the International Eucharistic Congresses have been ongoing now for many, many years. I think, I'm trying to remember which one this is. This is one in particular that for Ecuador marks the 150th anniversary of the consecration of Ecuador to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Now, we can go back into the 19th century for the establishment of international Eucharistic Congresses. And these have been going on now for many, many years, as I was just mentioning. And it has typically drawn popes who attend it. John Paul II went to them. Benedict XVI went. Pope Francis has. Ironically, Pope Francis will not be attending the one in Quito because he's scheduled to do the longest trip of his pontificate. He's going to Asia around that same time. So it's not going to be possible for him to do it. There was some sort of a snafu in the scheduling, at least that's according to the Vatican. Typically, though, again, popes do this. I was in Budapest in 2021 for the last International Eucharistic Congress. And that, in the middle of COVID, remember, still drew thousands from around the world. And the Eucharistic procession, which is the centerpiece for this, so we have the opening Mass, then we have various testimonies stretched out over a week. Then there was a Eucharistic procession in the streets of Budapest. Cardinal Erdo, who's the Archbishop of Esztergom, Budapest, was told basically, we can't guarantee that anyone's going to show up to this. The era for this sort of thing just isn't there anymore. And I believe, if I remember correctly, the official estimate was about 300,000 people processing through the streets of Budapest.
Wow.
In a similar way, we saw in Indianapolis, it's about 60,000 people processing through the streets of Indianapolis in the summer People were just drawn to this.
Yep.
And I can go back to the Napa event in New York, where they have the Eucharistic procession through the streets of Manhattan. And it is a powerful witness. It is a transforming moment. And one of the keys to this International Eucharistic Congress and why it moves around the world is that it brings people to this heightened appreciation of the beauty of the Eucharist and the teachings on the Eucharist, but on an international level. And it's a great event. And I know EWTN is going to be covering it. I'll be going to Quito in September for this as well.
I can hear the music. Dr. Matthew Bunson is our guest. We're talking about the church in the news. If you have questions about the church in the news, about Pope Francis, about cardinals or bishops or things on the national level, you are welcome to call with your questions, 888-318-7884. I've kind of monopolized the conversation, but I'll open up the phones when we get back right after this on Catholic Answers Live. What was the church like in its infancy? In a word, Catholic. And Joe Heschmeyer has the receipts. In his best-selling book, The Early Church Was the Catholic Church, he gives you the details from the historical records of the first 2 centuries of Christianity. Right now, get a copy for just $10, plus free shipping if you live in the continental United States. Get more information and order The Early Church Was the Catholic Church at theearlychurchwascatholic.com.
Why We're Catholic is the one book you can hand to anyone to invite them into or back to the Catholic faith. With more than 400,000 copies sold, Trent Horn's book has had a #1 ranking on Amazon.com for 5 years running. Now available in softcover, bulk cases, ebook, and on Audible. Find out what the excitement is all about. Order your copies of Why We're Catholic at shop.catholic.com or visit whywearecatholic.com.
As we read the Gospels, every Christian faces the question again and again, what does Jesus mean? Getting the answer right is critical to both growth in holiness and fruitful evangelization. Want to know Jesus better so you can introduce him to your friends? Then it's time to get serious about understanding his words. Why not join Catholic Answers for our 10th annual Apologetics Conference? Learn from me the parables, sermons, and conversations of Jesus Christ. September 26th through 29th, right here in sunny San Diego. Learn from our guests, Dr. Scott Hahn and Kimberly Hahn, Dr. Ray Guarendi, Father Sebastian Walsh, Billy Junker, Father Paul Check, and, of course, all of your favorite Catholic Answers apologists. It'll be 4 days of fun, faith, fellowship, and a live radio show. Seats are still available, but going fast. Visit CatholicAnswersConference.com or call 1-888-291-8000 today.
Matt Swaim here. Join us for the best of the Sunrise Morning Show with summer reading suggestions, pilgrimage ideas, and tips for incorporating your faith into summer activities. Now back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. We've been kind of asking you, and I'll ask you again, if you have a testimonial you'd like to share about what this radio program, Catholic Answers Live, has meant to you or a family member or someone else. We would love that. They are very helpful to us. If we have them recorded, you can do a video or audio one. All you do is go to CatholicAnswersLive.com and just click the red button there that says testimonial on it. And it'll let you record whatever testimonial you would like to give. And we really are grateful to those who have taken us up on this. I don't know if it's an offer or a request, but you've helped us out, and they do mean a great deal. And we would love it if you would share yours. Just go to CatholicAnswersLive.com and leave your testimonial by clicking the red testimonial button. Our guest this hour is the Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. Something that we've talked about this before, but it's just so impressive how EWTN News has grown and kind of prospered in over the last decade or so. I mean, the everything from the look of the sets and to the quality of the reporters and journalists. It's congratulations on that. It's a wonderful resource.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And we're continuing to expand and to develop, to mature as a news organization.
Yeah.
We're very proud of what we've been able to accomplish, but we also know that we're very humble about it, that there is an immense amount of work to do. And as we grow, especially internationally, the donations that we receive are so crucial to making all of that possible. The amount of work that goes in every day on the part of our reporters and editors and producers is just absolutely phenomenal to sit watching.
Yeah, it is, and you really are covering the world from a Catholic perspective. It's not just insider news. You know, it's covering the world from a Catholic perspective. It's very much
yesterday.
needed.
Yesterday, for example, we were able to on EWTN News Nightly. We always have a package from Rome because obviously. We, of course, have news from Rome, but we also were able to broadcast a beautiful package on Saint Charbel Makhlouf that was put together by our Asimina, which is our Middle East North Africa agency. So it's Arabic-based, and they're based in Erbil, and they have a very keen understanding of what's going on all over the Middle East and the Near East, including Lebanon. And of course, with the feast day of Charbel, Saint Charbel on Wednesday, it's a big event, and so we're able to cover that, and it's a perspective I think that a lot of people don't have.
Yeah, because you get the same 3 stories repeated 17 times an hour on the cable news.
Yes.
So you just I'm quite serious. You could watch television news in the United States and not know anything about what's happening in Africa or Asia or South America. And the Catholic Church being the universal church, you guys are in those places. So anyway.
Yeah, that's right. And we one of the things that we do, we have ACI Africa, which is based in Nairobi. So to your point exactly. So Asi Prensa is the largest Catholic Spanish language news service anywhere. So these are all resources that Catholic news consumers, but we're also finding that a lot of just regular news consumers are finding their way to us.
Good, that's great. Yeah,
and it's important to keep doing that.
Yeah, like the Christian Science Monitor in the old days. It wasn't
Yes,
just for
I
Christian
remember
Science.
that.
Everybody had to read that because they did just
Yes.
great reporting.
Yeah, they have really good, solid reporting.
But you have good theology underneath all of it too. So
well, that's the thing. Yeah, we're keen believers, obviously, in redemptive journalism. That at the end of the day, we're trying to bring souls to Christ.
Your questions are welcome for Dr. Bunson. 888-318-7884. Michael is in Denver, Colorado, watching on YouTube. Michael, go ahead with your question for Dr. Bunson.
Yes, Mr. Kellett, thank you for taking my call. And Matthew, first of all, I got to tell you, I read your article on the Passion of Al Cresta, and wow, that was emotional. But thank you so much. That
thank you.
Really meant a lot to me. Thank you.
Thank
Absolutely.
you.
And yeah. And my question here, so there is a church here in Colorado that is suing a town in a bid to shelter homeless individuals in trailers. Last year, the town of Castle Rock, Colorado, ordered a church to stop violating zoning regulations by providing shelter for a homeless person in an RV in the back of the church parking lot. And the lawsuit cites arguments made by other churches who are trying to serve the homeless, saying that the Colorado Church argues that helping people in need is a religious activity protected by the Constitution. And you may recall the Supreme Court's decision to allow these towns in Oregon to clear out these homeless encampments, but they offered no solution as to where these people that are homeless can go. And I the Bible obviously would say, the churches have not only an obligation, but kind of a responsibility to help everyone, but especially people in need the most. And I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on this lawsuit. And
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I'll say I have not followed the specific lawsuit. What I can speak to, though, is something you just pointed out, and I was going to go directly to that, and that is the recent Supreme Court decision that will allow the clearing out of homeless encampments. Governor Gavin Newsom in California, I think just today, made an announcement that California was going to be basically purging its large number of homeless encampments that have become such a significant aspect of the landscape of California. But you also, I think, very correctly raise the other key question is, what are we going to do to care for the homeless who are growing in numbers and are receiving very little assistance, especially mental health assistance, and as we're now moving rapidly toward the fall. The Catholic Church is one of the biggest and most important key providers of care for the homeless. We have Catholic Charities, but we also on the diocesan level have shelters and facilities and efforts on the diocesan, but also the parish level to care for the homeless, those who are on the streets or those who are on the verge of becoming homeless. So this is a call that we have to follow. It is one of the key components as well of Catholic social teaching, to care for the protection of human dignity, the pursuit of the common good, all of those things that we're called to do as a church. Now, the bishops themselves were disappointed, I know, the U.S. bishops in the Supreme Court decision, because it does open the door, as we have seen just today, as I said, in California with Governor Newsom, taking pretty potentially draconian steps against the homeless. The question has to keep being asked, what then are the alternatives for those? And the church will always be there to provide as much assistance as possible, but at the end of the day, we also have to realize what are some of the root causes for this economically and socially that are causing this.
Michael, thank you very much for the call and for the question. Everyone has, I mean, not everyone, but I think most people have noticed something has gone wrong in this regard over the last decade in the United States. Streets don't look the same as they looked a decade ago. But I don't know that we have, maybe you have reporting on this about, you said about the root causes, but what are we doing wrong as a society that so many people are in such desperate straits?
Right. Well, the answer is it's multifaceted, and I know that there are many, many opinions on this. And the way it falls also under the Catholic social teaching, that the solutions to this are prudential. There are a lot of policy prescriptions that can be proposed, and the church certainly can weigh in on all of these things, but the church continues to do what she does, and that is to continue to push for the recognition and defense of human dignity. I mention that because when we look at sort of the tapestry of causes, one is the complete breakdown of the family, where we no longer have the sort of social, cultural nets that families always provided. We're seeing as well a wearing down of the small communities, the decline of social interaction. We have as well the obvious economic disparities. We have opioid crises, fentanyl crises. We have a loss of the sense of the sacredness of the person. We have over-bureaucratization. So the list is fairly endless.
Yeah. Michael, I'm very grateful for the call. Thank you so much. I'm particularly grateful because it's a problem that's all around us, and I think we could easily do a program on the church in the news and neglect such an important and central thing. So I'm very grateful you brought it to our attention. Anybody's call is welcome. If you want to talk about the church in the news, whatever you got, 888-318-7884.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
The Catechism defines evangelization as the proclamation of Christ and His gospel by word and the testimony of life. But what does that look like in real life? It looks like St. Paul street evangelists out in the public square sharing the good news. We're a Catholic nonprofit that starts conversations by handing out free sacramentals. Then we employ our method of listen, befriend, proclaim, and invite. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to learn more.
proclaiming the faith, changing lives.
The year was 1981. EWTN begins transmitting 4 hours a day to 60,000 homes. The network will exist solely on viewer contributions, as there will be no advertising and no fundraising.
To learn more about Mother Angelica's life and the history of EWTN, visit EWTN.com/Mother Angelica.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. The lines are open. If you want to talk to Dr. Matthew Bunson, 888-318-7884 is the number. 888-318-7884. I did have one question I wanted to ask you. I think we're gonna kind of. We haven't really talked about this. We usually, on a political year, we talk about it here at Catholic Answers. What are we talking about? What are we not talking about? Where are the landmines? That kind of thing. And my preference on our show, because we're an apologetic show, is to talk as little about politics as possible. But I do want to ask you this question.
Sure.
The fact that President Joe Biden is Catholic and also pro-choice, it seems to me that posed particular. I mean, you could see that this created tension. The fact that he's not running, that I think Vice President Harris, I think, is Baptist. Donald Trump is not a Catholic. Does this kind of take the fire out from under some of that?
Well, yes and no. You're absolutely right that Joe Biden, throughout his political career, was ardently, and we're almost speaking now in the past tense of his career, but presumably he will be president for the next 6 months. We'll have to see how all of that shakes out. We've had so many surprises in just the last weeks that nothing would surprise us anymore. But you're absolutely right that his presidency in particular created tensions and created some serious questions regarding the dichotomy that existed, that somebody who very publicly proclaimed himself to be a faithful Catholic would hold positions on abortion that were so diametrically opposed to the teachings of the church, and was also very aggressive in his promotion, for example, of the LGBTQ agenda, a gender ideology, to use Pope Francis's terminology.
Yeah. Right.
So there were a number of issues that are involved. Now, abortion is going to be one of the pillars of the presumed Democratic nominee, Vice President Kamala Harris. She plans to make that a centerpiece of her campaign. Whether that works out politically, we'll have to see. Right now, it's polling on the issues list very low, even among Democrats. So much of the focus now is on the economy and things like inflation. So it's possible that abortion itself will not necessarily play the type of significant role that it does as a deciding factor in some of these races down ballot. Harris, though, Vice President Harris plans very clearly to keep pushing on this.
Right.
We have the added interest, however, that with the appointment or choosing of J.D. Vance as
I forgot he's Catholic.
Former President Trump.
I didn't mention him. I apologize.
Choosing him as his vice president, I think, was revealing. And he is very much a Catholic. I would encourage everyone to go to ncregister.com to take a look at a piece that our senior editor, Jonathan Legal, wrote on the post-liberalism, the post-liberal attitudes of Senator Vance. Essentially, he represents in some ways what some see as a movement within Catholicism in the United States of a sort of this post-liberal approach to things. And when we're talking about that, what we're discussing is a return of a more communal-based philosophy versus the personalistic approach, individual liberties that we have seen in recent years. Some have connected that to the question of integralism, which has been much debated in recent years within certain Catholic intellectual circles. But Vance certainly represents two things. I think the generation of recent converts that have very much been of note in Catholicism.
Yeah.
The other is he's very much a populist, chosen, I think, very distinctly by President Trump, former President Trump, to serve as not necessarily a direct successor, but somebody who's going to be able to articulate the populist ideals that Trump has come to represent.
Yeah, I want to get to two things there. If you could just define integralism to us, because some of our listeners will not have heard that this is in certain parts of the Catholic world, this is a big raging debate. What is integralism, and why are we debating
it? One of the interesting things about integralism that I've encountered is its definition seems to change. It's sort of like synodality, I find. That a lot of people have differing opinions of it and differing interpretations of it. But I would describe it this way, that it is a return to a type of Christian culture that if you wanted to have a key phrase or an image in your head, it's Christendom. The idea of Christianity permeating everything in culture. And the question then becomes, is it compatible, is it even feasible in a multicultural environment, but more historically, I think for the United States, a pluralistic environment. It runs directly into the headwinds of modernity, especially as we see with the reality of religions all coming together as they do in the United States, but also the types of governments that we have now in the United States. This is a republic. We have the various limitations on the imposition of religion as a state, an enterprise. So it's, as you say, you're absolutely right. It's a very controversial topic. My question is how one goes about restoring a sense of Christendom versus restoring a sense of Christian culture and having Christian culture actually active and engaged and playing a significant role in the life of not just this country, but countries everywhere, because we have seen the importance of Christianity in building civilization, in stabilizing culture. We were just talking about the care for the homeless, the weak, the defenseless. If you remove that, if you unplug that, you're going to end up with the types of travesties that we just saw tonight, apparently, at the Olympics in Paris. Where once you begin unplugging God, everything is possible, and none of it is good.
There is, I bet, just about anybody you asked, whether religious or not religious, Catholic, Christian, Jewish, atheist, whatever, would say community is not healthy. That one of whatever the diseases we have, one of the symptoms is that we don't have healthy communities the way families are not healthy, churches are not healthy, even public schools, all these communities, they're not healthy. So when you talk about this kind of less personalistic, less individualistic, more communitarian Catholicism, I think part of the attraction of that is, well, the other thing is just not working.
Right. Yeah, and one of the fears that people have is this idea of individualism is running wild, that it moves from individual freedom to libertinism to a host of the isms that we encounter today. And how do we then go about rebuilding a sense of national purpose, but also a sense, as you say, of community, of people actually looking out for each other?
Yeah.
And then the decisive question for that is, what role does the state play in that? Can you mandate morality? We're seeing in the modern era, especially, that the state can mandate immorality.
That's right.
And amorality, or their vision of amorality.
Right.
So can we go back to the idea of legislating morality, or does it begin more concretely with the family, rebuilding the family structure? And that brings us straight into what are broadly now called the culture wars.
Yep, it does indeed. But one of the things that the Catholic Church over her life is really, really good at is building communities. That's what we do. I mean, the monasteries of Europe built Europe. Towns were built around the monasteries. The towns became nations. We're really good at community when we're when we're being really
picking up the
Catholic.
pieces when everything falls apart.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to ask you about, there are revelations about Pope Pius XII in relation to Father Maciel, the founder of the Legionaries of Christ,
Yes.
and who's found to have been a serial sexual abuser and a liar and a manipulator, and it was a horrible, horrible thing. So what are the revelations about Pius XII?
Yeah, well, it's in 2020, the Vatican archives, specific to the period for Pope Pius XII, the Venerable Pius XII, that we all pray that he'll be beatified at some point, were opened to scholars. And the first big question was going to be what was going to be revealed relating to Pius XII's statements and activities during World War II and throughout the Holocaust. Well, that's a side issue. The more we've discovered, the more vindicated the position of the authentic defenders of Pius XII had been. A bit of a surprise emerged, however, when it became apparent that Father Maciel, the founder, infamous founder of the Legionnaires of Christ, was apparently under investigation dating all the way back to the 1940s and 50s. And this goes back to the pontificate of Pius XII. And there seem to be indications based on the Vatican archives that Pius XII was beginning to move toward actually removing him. His death in 1958 short-circuited that.
The Pope's death, you mean? I just want to be clear. Yeah.
The Pope's death, yes. Pius XII's passing in 1958 essentially short-circuited that. Now, I'm not in any way suggesting that John the 23rd covered up for Maciel or anything like that. What I'm getting at is that in that vacuum that was created by the death of Pius XII, Maciel was always very clever at building and finding friends and influencing things. And he apparently was able to influence things enough to buy himself time into the next pontificate to be safe again for a time. Now, time passes, and we know, of course, what happened with the subsequent revelations in the succeeding decades. But what this tells us is that Pius XII was, in fact, looking at this. And the fact that nothing came of it is something of an indictment, a failure. But eventually justice did catch up with him. And it's always striking to me that one of the first acts of the pontificate of Benedict XVI was to move on Maciel and to impose the restrictions that he did. But these types of revelations, there's always concern anytime these archives are opened, what's going to be found. Wild accusations are usually made, and we have found consistently that the truth reveals, especially the record of Pius XII, that we have nothing to be ashamed of and that he is vindicated by history.
And the reason he needs vindication is that in the 1960s, a real campaign of lies was waged against him that he had been Hitler's pope.
That's right, yeah. And then subsequently with various books and documentaries that simply repeated many of those lies, especially as they were perpetrated by Rolf Hochhuth in the play The Deputy, and then in subsequent very salacious books that, of course, have all been debunked, and even their authors have stepped away from them.
Now, I seem to remember that Pope Francis, and please correct me if I'm wrong about this, actually allowed early opening of Pius XII's archives. Is that true?
That's right.
And is this a fruit of that?
Yes, yeah. So this goes back to 2020, as I was saying, and really this willingness to allow scholars to take these deep, long looks academically.
Yeah.
With the provision, of course, that these have to be reputable scholars, that people who have genuine academic interest in the era and aren't simply fishing for scandalous material.
Yeah.
And that's where I think we have to rely on the academics. We have to trust them on their motives. Sometimes that can be misplaced, but so far I think, as we have seen where Pius XII is concerned, that the investigations themselves are worth undertaking. Let's remember, too, that it was Pius the 12th, for example, who made the heroic decision to explore what is now the Scavi underneath St. Peter's Basilica.
That's right, yeah.
So it was courageous on his part and from a very courageous pope.
Let me just ask you this before we go, because some non-Catholics will want to know that. Do you have to be a Catholic scholar to get into those Vatican archives, or
No.
could, say, an atheist scholar who was a real historian?
Yeah,
you could.
A reputed author and scholar is allowed in. Yeah.
Our guest has been Dr. Matthew Bunson, doing wonderful work over there at EWTN, running their news department, which just gets better and better. A real great place to become informed about the world. It's hard to do as an American to find out anything outside of America. You can do it at EWTN News. Dr. Bunson, thank you for being here with us on this Friday afternoon.
Oh, joy to be with you. Have a great weekend.
You too. Thanks. All right, that'll do it for us. We'll see you next time, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.